Hello, everyone, and welcome back to TTRPG Talk. I'm rjcurrer, your host as always. And tonight, for our TTRPG discussion, I thought we would take a crack at collaborative world building. So, just as a reminder, these little Wednesday chats are, brief interactive affairs where I would love to hear from you if you have comments or questions as we go through the topic here. But otherwise, I'm going to kind of run through my thoughts on tonight's topic, collaborative world building, and we'll pick up from there. So, as far as that collaborative world building goes, let's start off with sort of what even is collaborative world building. What do we mean by that, right? Like, because that phrase gets bandied about a lot, and I am not always sure that everybody means the same thing when they're talking about it. But here's what I perceive collaborative world building is. Effectively, it's the process of allowing players to contribute to the actual construction of the world in a TTRPG campaign, meaning that they come up with things that become canon, that become actual settings and places and objects and stuff that exists within that world. And they do that, with some direction from the DM, or even perhaps without any direction from the DM. But effectively, it's that process of working together as a table to create this shared vision. Because really, honestly, TTRPGs are a shared vision of a fantasy setting. Even if you're playing a sci-fi TTRPG, it's still a fictional environment in which we're all playing make believe, and so it's a way to kind of get everybody to buy in to that fictional world and build it out within their own imaginations. And to that end, it is a really valuable thing to do, I think, because it involves well, like I said, it involves creating that shared vision where everybody at the table is contributing a piece of their own imagination to this. And so it's a lot easier for everybody to picture the whole because they've imagined a piece. They've offered up a chunk of it. But also something that I think that it does that gets really kind of undersold and people don't talk about a lot is it makes lore a lot more accessible. And it does that because if your characters, if your players are coming up with lore themselves, if they're coming up with their own additions to the world, their own, uh, you know, settlements and concepts and backgrounds and establishments and institutions, well, then they already know that stuff. You don't have to instill that information in them as the DM. They've already got it. And so it makes for a deeper experience. It makes for a deeper dive into this fictional setting that we're all creating together at a TTRPG table. So it's a really valuable thing to do, and one that I think that DMs underuse, or GMs, we'll use the more universal term, the GMs tend to underuse at a lot of tables. That being said, I think there's also a lot of GMs that do collaborative world building without even realizing that that's what they're doing. We're going to talk a little bit about that as we move on. So before we kind of dive into the styles of collaborative world building and how you get involved in it, how would you go about starting it and using it at your table? Um, I would like us to kind of answer the question: should you even worry about it? Should you even do it? I would say that in for the most part, yes. The answer would be emphatically yes. There's a lot to do with collaborative world building. There's a lot of value that it adds to your table, as we just mentioned. And it's a great way to really kind of cement players and GM together. But there are instances where maybe you don't want to do collaborative world building. Depending on the style of game you're playing and the style of people you're playing with, there might be times when you really want to shoulder the burden of world building entirely on your own and deliver that information to your players as opposed to having them create any facet of it. Although I'd say that that's relatively rare. I'd say that really the only time to do that is when you are either trying to create a world in which it is you are intentionally keeping the characters in the dark about many aspects of it. For example, perhaps they're sucked into an alternate dimension or domain of dread or something along those lines, where they don't You don't want them to have any background information where they're going to have to learn lore piece by piece. They're going to have to learn it all kind of as they go. Or you're playing with players who are really looking to have kind of a reactive experience, is what I'll call it. And I don't mean that negatively. I mean that there are really kind of two types of players out there. There are proactive players and there are reactive players. And proactive players are the ones that want to contribute to the world building. They want to tell part of the story themselves. They want to weave their character into that. And reactive players are people who want their characters to be responding to a story. They want events to happen and they want to overcome those challenges. They want it to kind of be swept up in a story, like reading a good book or watching a great movie or something along those lines. And so if you've got a table full of reactive players who really aren't interested in telling the story themselves, they'd rather be kind of swept up and swallowed by it, well, then collaborative world building might not be their cup of tea as opposed to your cup of tea. So it may be a time in which you decide you don't want to do that. But I would say that overall, very rarely do you end up with a table that is exclusively reactive players. And if you have any kind of proactive players who do want to get involved in telling the story themselves, well, then collaborative world building is a great place to get them involved and to kind of get everybody tied into this world that you're creating. Bearing in mind that you don't have to force everybody to do some of the collaboration. So, to that end, let's talk about it. There are really kind of two styles, as I see it, of collaborative world building. There is what I'll call simple and then foundational. And simple collaborative world building is something that I think that a lot of GMs do without even realizing it. And it's the simple ask of it's the simple action, I should say, of having your players give you information about the world while you're playing in game. So that might come down to asking for flavor, asking them to describe something, an event, something that's going on, something that they notice. One of my favorite things to do for that is to is when you've got players who are looking for something in particular and they go, well, is there such and such a shop around? And you go, oh yes, actually there is. Tell me a little bit about it. What's the name of the shop? What's something that you notice about it immediately, that your character notices about it immediately? What is it that catches their eye and makes them notice this place? Asking for those little details. That's all collaborative world building. That's all getting your players to tell you a part of the story. And in this simple collaborative world building sort of style, really you're just asking for bite sized pieces at a time. You're asking for them to just give you little pinpricks as you play and eventually building out this tapestry, this pointillist, we'll say, if we're going to use the pinprick metaphor, sort of image of the world in which everybody's engaging in and everybody's playing in. So uh, the simple style is really straightforward. And one of the cool advantages about it is that you can start doing it at any time. You don't have to start a new campaign to get into collaborative world building if you're using this sort of simple style. You can just start in your next session by simply asking questions of your players. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to do that and my recommendations for that in a little bit here. But first, I want to talk about foundational. And the foundational style, as I'll call it, of collaborative world building, because that starts at session zero. That starts before you ever really, pick up dice and start rolling for character actions and what have you. All right. It happens as you're developing characters and actually building the world from scratch. And so, it's a great thing to start in session zero. It's a really cool way to start building shared lore with your campaign and with your players by having them come up with pieces of that. It's a great way to come up with adventure settings and rumors and settlements and all those little odds and ends and bits and pieces that go into creating a fully rendered world. It's a great way to kind of share that load. And you do that at session zero, and you start working with your players then as they come up with pieces and add it into the adventure. And you kind of go through and you jot these down during session zero. You keep notes of what they've come up with and what's going to exist in this world and what we've all decided is collaborative lore and that kind of thing. And then you use that to start fleshing out the rest of the world, where you're almost filling in the gaps as opposed to creating the key core elements that are going to exist. And that's a really fun way to do this. I've done it a few times, and my players got really, really excited with it because their characters already had rumors of things that they might want to pursue, that they might want to go out into the world and find. They'd heard stories of distant places and ancient artifacts that already existed because they came up with them during session 0. And that meant that I had to do a lot less lifting trying to kind of goad them into adventures that I had in mind, or try to get them on track for things that I had written out already and that sort of deal. It just made it a much more organic process, and it flowed really, really nicely. One So that's it. It's one of the great advantages if you're running the sort of foundational style of collaborative world building. I will say that it doesn't work as well if you're running a module. You can still use simple world building if you're running a module, but since a lot of the world building is already done and a lot of the pieces, especially the really important bits, are already built into a published module, foundational world building doesn't really, foundational collaborative world building doesn't really come into play there a lot. But you can still use the simple collaborative world building for that. So if those are the two styles, how do you get started with it? How do you actually start doing this at your table, um, in kind of a practical sense? There's no right or wrong way to kind of go about this. There's a lot of ways that you can do this, and if you've got ideas, ways that you have done it in the past, I would love to hear them. I'd love for you to toss them to the chat and us to chat about those sorts of things. But I've got a couple simple techniques that I use and recommend that people use if they're getting involved with collaborative world building for the very first time. And again, they get broken down by these two styles, simple and foundational. And so with getting started with simple is well, it's really simple. That's part of the reason why I call it simple collaborative world building, is it's just asking questions. Um, I try to go beyond asking questions about character flavor, stuff like I want to get beyond sort of, how do you slay this monster? How, what does your magic missile look like? When you cast spells, what is it? How does it look? That kind of stuff. It's all great stuff to ask, but I'm talking about kind of getting beyond that when you're starting to do the collaborative world building bit, and now asking for things that are external to the player character. So, my favorite thing to do is the characters enter a place, usually a shop or a town or something along those lines, and I ask them what it is that their characters notice. What's the first thing that their characters notice about this place? I might give them a little bit of a prompt about sort of where they are and what they're experiencing, especially if they're very new to collaborative world building, or I might not if they're veteran players. I might just tell them that, hey, you're in a curio shop. What's something that catches your eye? And you're just asking them to give you these little details. And you will be floored at kind of what comes out of this, what it is that your players come up with. All sorts of little details, from the smell of the place to, they might come up with, an interesting curio that's in the shop, or something that's hung in the window, or an unusual custom of the people, or what the food here is like. It's all kinds of little details that will just kind of bubble up organically from the imaginations of your players as they're focusing on different world building details than you traditionally focus on. Now, the fear that I find that keeps a lot of DMs, a lot of GMs from doing this sort of thing is, what if my characters come up with something game breaking? What if we walk into the curio shop and I go, all right, what's something here that catches your eye? And they go, the Holy Avenger in the corner. Like, that's, you kind of like clench up for a minute there because you don't want to go, nope, that didn't exist. You don't see that. That's not real, because that shuts down the player. But just because they see what they think is a Holy Avenger in the corner doesn't mean that they don't actually see a knockoff, or a sword that has been styled to look like one, but it's not actually the real magical item. Or maybe it is the real magical item and it's so freaking heavily guarded that they're never going to get a hold of it, you know? Uh, but it exists and it's here, and maybe it's something that they need to build up to and save for and try to come back for later, or maybe they find out this is a place where they can get knockoff stuff, they can get forgeries made. You take kind of what it is that they tossed in there that might be game breaking, and you just pivot it a little bit so it aligns better with the game, but it still exists in there, just in a slightly different way than they perhaps intended it or perhaps initially imagined it. So you don't shut down the player, you take what they're doing and you kind of judo twist it so that now it aligns better with the overall world, and now you have a richer, deeper experience. Vorpalbite, greetings, Vorpalbite. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks for jumping in the chat. So, getting started with simple collaborative world building is, in fact, really, really easy. It's just questions and being prepared to pivot those answers, to do a little bit of yes and, a little bit of no but kind of stuff in there, and trust that your players are going to build a cool world with you and not try to take advantage of every opportunity, trying to stuff your world full of power-ups and things that their characters can take advantage of, instead creating a deeper, richer sort of story experience. And frankly, on trust, one of the best things that I've ever done at any TTRPG table that I have ever been a part of is just trust everybody to tell a great story. The number of times I've run into people who are trying to just, sort of win everything, who are trying to kind of max out and be the unkillable god, is so rare compared to the number of times that I've run into tables that are full of people who just want to tell an interesting story and understand that interesting stories involve challenges and setbacks. So just trust your players with simple collaborative world building, and I think you'll be floored with the kind of story details that come out of it. Now, for foundational collaborative world building is a little more involved because you're starting from kind of the ground up. You're starting from nothing and you're building up from there, which does two things for you. One, it leaves you with a wide open canvas, meaning that your players can come up with all kinds of stuff, and stuff that you may not have even imagined. It may not be in line with how you initially imagined this campaign would kind of go. And that's okay. You can always offer a few guidelines. You can always say, hey, we're gonna play this style of adventure. Let's come up with stuff that fits with this. And that's all right. There's nothing wrong with that. It looks like we got a couple comments in the chat here. So let's see here. Vorpalbite says, I'm an older gamer, started in 1974. Hey, welcome. I started playing in the early 90s myself. And so let's see here. Jonathan Frost says, I've tried collaborative route and run into the just entertain me players putting all the onus on me. Yeah, Jonathan, they exist. They absolutely do. And that is what I would call reactive players. They just want to get swept up in the story of the adventure. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but it may not be that that's the kind of players you want to play for. And there's nothing wrong with that either. Recognizing that your GM style differs from the play style of some people at the table. Let's see here. Vorpalbite says, I do not tell stories that present challenges, and they present outcomes. Well, in my vernacular, Vorpal, that's a story. That's all it is. A story is not necessarily a plot. And I think that's something that a lot of people get confused with here. A plot is something that we go from point A to point B to point C, and we don't deviate. And you're right. I don't think that there's a lot of room for plots in TTRPGs. But a story is simply something occurs and the players come up with a solution, and that takes us somewhere else, and then something else occurs. And a story is just the narrative of how we get from the beginning of a campaign to the end of it. That's all we're using that term for in terms of storytelling. It's just the overall adventure itself, and accounting for all of the cool decisions and ideas that our players come up with. We certainly don't want to limit those. Yeah, plot equals railroad to some degree. I absolutely 100% agree with that. I mean, I think that there are ways that you could use that term to not mean that, but that gets a little too nuanced in this. But so effectively, yes, we don't want to railroad anybody ever at a TTRPG table. I'm just not, at least I don't think we ever should. Maybe there's an argument to be made for it. I'd love to hear it if somebody's got a justification for why we should railroad players. Um, but uh, but agreed. We're here to help facilitate a collaborative story that emerges organically from the decisions of the characters and the players at the table. Um, Not here to form fit them into a plot structure that we've devised previously. And that actually is, to that end, one of the great values, I think, of the foundational style of collaborative world building is it gets your players in on the storytelling from the very beginning. It brings them in at the foundational level to where essentially, like I said, you're working with a blank canvas where you maybe have a general idea of the kind of story you want to tell, something like, I want to tell a fantasy western, or I want to do an Indiana Jones escapade through the jungle. And you have sort of maybe this broad idea of what you want, and you can lay that down in front of your players with that sort of notion, and then have them help you build and fill in all the sorts of pieces that can go into that so that you're kind of already have the initial scaffolding for this campaign by the end of your session zero, and you are just filling in kind of the routes between all these different places, filling in the gaps that you notice and it exist, and existing to to create a reactive world that responds in real time to your players and their decisions. So, getting started with that is, I think, a three-step process. You can absolutely um, get um, you can actually absolutely get a whole lot deeper than this when you're doing your collaborative world building. But if you haven't really done much of it before and you want to start with the foundational, there's three sort of steps that I would start with. And the first one is I would have your players help you come up with lore and rumors specifically. Have them come up with things that their characters have heard about the wide world, you know, missing magical items, artifacts tucked away, frightening beasts, haunted forests, all that kind of stuff, things that they have heard. And then these become adventure hooks for you. You get them to come up with these rumors, you scribble this down, and now you've got all these adventure hooks, things that your characters that the characters can bite on and follow through. And best, you don't have to plant them out throughout your world then, because they already know them. They come to session one with their characters already having this knowledge, which is super, super useful. Vorpal says, kick down the door, kill the monster, count the gold, and collect the XP. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Hey, you know what? That works for some tables, and there's nothing wrong with that. And kick down the door, kill the monster, count gold, 3 steps. There you go. Hey, you know what? I started learning, and I'm sure you have had a chance to play D&D Basic, like first edition Basic. That's what I learned to play TTRPGs on. And you know what? That was a big part of that adventure was kick down door, fight monster, collect gold. And you know what? There was nothing wrong with it. Sometimes that's the story you want to tell. But so I would say, yeah, start with rumors. It's an easy way to get your players involved. It's easy for them to start to come up with, and it doesn't have to be world. It doesn't have to be world breaking or game breaking, because no matter how powerful the rumor, it just is more difficult to achieve whatever the outcome is at the end. Or the rumor might turn out to be wrong in some category, and there's a surprise and a twist and that kind of thing. So coming up with this rumor table gives you all of these adventure hooks that your players can work with, and they start the game with them, making it easy for them to go, well, we want to follow up on this one first, and giving you a very natural starting point and a reason for all of these characters to come together. Step 2 would be adding elements that touch PC creation. So meeting things like clerics coming up with the kinds of the pantheon that exists in this world, the pantheon of gods, clerics and paladins or druids or whomever you like. Everybody can contribute to that kind of thing, but those are things that get involved in character creation. What are the institutions that go into supporting these pantheons? What are the major churches and shrines and organized religions? um, you know, when you've got your mages and your, warlocks and what have you, what are the magic schools? Are there schools of magic? How does one learn magic in this world? Where do they find it? That kind of stuff. Having them come up with all of those things that touch on the character backstory, which again is a very natural thing for a lot of players to do. Um, they uh, they're going to build some of this stuff up just by virtue of their own backstory creation when they are when they're working on building their characters. And so just take the institutions that they create, take the gods they come up with, take the schools of magic and universities and libraries and what have you, and use them. Make them canon, make them things that exist in this world and that everybody kind of knows about. And it one gives you a lot of stuff to work with, and it gives you seeds for settlements and civilizations. But two, it also gives them a chance to kind of tell their backstory, which is something a lot of players really want to do and don't always get the opportunity to do. They can tell that story at the table, and now everybody kind of knows it. Now they're aware of those institutions, and again, you now don't have to no longer have to seed that lore. Everybody knows it because they came up with it together. Let's see here. Purple White says, white box. Respect. Mine was black box. We didn't have rumors back in 1974 and said 25% of the treasure were maps. Yeah, that was a fun place to do that. Rumors replaced maps. I still like putting maps in. I think they count as rumors. It's a cool mechanism, and it's just fun when people find a treasure map. Who doesn't like a treasure map? I've built whole campaigns around somebody getting a treasure map seeded to them after somebody died or something along those lines. It's a fun thing to do. Jonathan Frost says, I like to weave seemingly disparate emergent events, random rolled together to give DMs options to consider as the game progresses. Yeah, absolutely. That is a cool way to do that. Sometimes just letting the dice come up with stuff is fun. There is, when you get into like fiction storytelling and that kind of stuff, one of the exercises that people talk a lot about that can be really useful is giving yourself constraints and coming up with things that have to exist in the story, and why they would exist, why it would turn out that way. And that's kind of, in my mind, the TTRPG equivalent of that is rolling a couple random things up, and deciding that these things must occur at some point and somehow in this adventure. And it's really kind of up to everybody to figure out where they fall in. Do they happen in the past? Do they happen in the future? Are they happening right now? All those things, and coming up with why they would happen. And that's a great exercise, especially if you're doing this foundational collaborative world building, to kind of toss that out at the table and get everybody to kind of buy in and figure this out together. Because again, you're now creating lore together, which is frankly the best way to do it. That's building lore together is always the best way to make lore. So cool idea. Big fan of that. Purple Bites' says, question, are backstories required? Can I just play without one? Backstories aren't required. A lot of characters enjoy it. Or I should say a lot of players enjoy it. Some players though, and I've certainly played this way before, just want to come up with who their character is as they play. They just want to play, they don't know the background, they don't know the backstory, they don't know where their character came from. They want to decide that and let that emerge organically as they play the adventure and as it becomes important. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Play the way that you want to play the game, and play with people who like to play the way that you want to play the game. That's the key in my mind to having fun, which is really the whole point of this thing, just to have fun. The last element here of foundational, the last step that I would recommend that you start with if you're brand new to collaborative world building and you want to try it out. Again, you can always go deeper than this, but the last one is building settlements together. Have your players build out the major settlements that'll exist in your adventure. Give them a few guidelines, things like, they need to tell you how big it is. They need to sort of tell you what the current calamity is. A little bit about the culture that's there. Just little feeder elements there. You can come up with a list, and maybe we'll do an episode at some point talking about building out settlements. Although, if you hang out with us during my Monday live stream, we build settlements on there all the time. In fact, we're working on one right now. It's obviously this channel at 6 p.m. Central Time if you're in the US. On Mondays, every Monday, we can build all this stuff out in live stream. So come check that out if you want to see kind of the nitty gritty on how I go through some of this stuff, creating some of this stuff in real time. But having your players help you build settlements and the civilizations that will exist in this world is another great way to do it. And it taps to their backstory if they want to make backstories. It can tap to that because now they have places they can be from. They can have family and friends in certain places that they already know about. They've got ideas for how those civilizations, how those settlements function, and who exists there and what they're like. And so they come alive beyond sort of the cardboard cutout versions. And again, now they become kind of common knowledge. It's not like everybody's from an obscure village or one of the major cities that exists in a standard campaign setting. You know, everybody has got a little bit of shared knowledge about the topography and where people come from and what sort of settlements exist. Purple Bite says, I despise homework. Yeah, I think a lot of us do. If a game takes longer than 5 minutes, I'm probably going to quit. I have entirely different advice. Do not prepare more than one session in advance. Yeah, when I talk about preparing the world, you're coming up with, um, I'm talking about coming up with tools for your toolbox, places that when the characters decide, hey, let's get out of town. What's outside of town? Well, that you already know. You already have an idea. And it's entirely up to you if you want to kind of run that from the seat of your pants or off the cuff, and just run adventures that are just adventure site that are kind of point crawl. There's nothing wrong with that. Those just aren't the kinds of games that I like to play. I prefer a more immersive world that has that I know when I'm DMing what is outside of town and where things are in relation to each other, because it helps my creative process going forward. Not necessarily prepping out exactly what the characters are going to experience ahead of time, from doing more than a session of prep in advance, although you certainly can. Although I think to some extent you'll end up wasting a lot of time if you do that. But more of, I like to know sort of the general topography and how the world kind of fits together and where all the pieces and parts are, so that when the characters zig when I thought they were going to zag, I am already prepared to adapt and roll with that. That helps me in my prep. That helps me in the way that I run adventures, and I think it helps a lot of people. Although again, all this stuff is advice. None of it's law. There are no TTRPG police. Nobody's going to haul you away for doing it different. But anyway, yes. So having your characters help you, build out rumor table, helping you build out the institutions that exist in the world, and then the settlements. If you do those all in session 0, for your first time working with collaborative world building, you're going to end up with some really cool stuff that everybody built together and gives a good, strong foundational base of knowledge for all of your players to work with as the game unfolds and to build off of, so that they can do their own role playing, and you don't have to spend time seeding lore and rumors and knowledge that might be important or might be valuable to them, because they already have that information. So that's pretty much all there is to collaborative world building. And I know that we're a little over the half-hour mark we normally try to aim this for, and I apologize for that, unless you enjoyed it, in which case I don't apologize for it. But that's kind of my bit on collaborative world building. I think that in a lot of cases, it's a really strong move for you to use that adds a lot of value to your table. And it's simple. You can use the simple style or the foundational style, depending on whether you're already in a campaign or whether you're creating one from scratch. And getting started can be as simple as just asking some Socratic questions, or it can be a basic sort of three-step process of working with rumors, institutions, and settlements. So it doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to overthink it, and you can get a lot of depth and color out of these worlds. So thank you so much. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. And I would love to hear your thoughts. If there's other ideas you'd like me to cover, I do these videos every Wednesday. And frequently I am just sort of pulling from my own, idea cap of things that I want to talk about. But if there's something in particular you want to talk about, um, and want me to discuss on here, let me know. I'm always open to ideas. Um, and if you want to see kind of how I go about building adventures from start to finish and warts and all that kind of stuff, come check me out on Monday evenings, 6 p.m. Central Time if you're in the US, where we're doing Let's Write an Adventure, and we're working on building our very own Domain of Dread with all of your help. So I hope I'll see you there, and I hope I'll see you next Wednesday. Thanks again, everybody.